I've had several people ask me about how I make my fabric covered journals, or, well, yeah, that's what you could call them. Anyways, this is an unofficial tutorial, and because I can't do like a real specific tutorial, because one, I've never done that for anything sewing related, but two, because each one's different, and each one has like its own measurements, and it's not a precise thing that I have going on here. But I will tell you this. There are a few things to keep in mind. And one of them is that you want to decide about what size you want your journal to be. And then you want to cut your front piece of fabric quite a bit bigger than that. Like maybe a good, I don't know, inch on each side, top, bottom, sides, because you're going to quilt it. Now, if you don't want to quilt it, then you don't have to cut it as big, maybe like a ½ an inch on each side, because you still are going to put batting behind it of some kind to make it poofy. And you need a ½ inch seam allowance for sewing the front and the back together, and then there will be like another 1/8 of an inch going around the perimeter for your top stitch. So, like I said, not very precise here. The main part is to make it big enough and not too tiny. Of course, if you make it too tiny, you can always cut your papers down. So there's that. I've started with a biggish piece of fabric. Very accurate measurement there. I've already put together my papers, and I know about what size I want them to be. So this is double, this is enough to cover all around that and then some, because you can see the lines I've drawn with the friction pin that will go away when heat is put on it. And this is where I'm going to quilt. So I'm going to stitch down along those lines to quilt my panel. I drew my lines an inch apart and put some nice cotton batting behind it. And I'm going to do that now. I'm going to stitch those lines. And I'm going to stitch them using a top stitching length, about 3.5 stitch length. So, also, you're supposed to start in the middle and work your way out when you're stitching lines for quilting things. I learned that recently. So, I'll be back with next steps. Also, your lines might not be straight, even though you have a drawn line there to guide you. Sometimes our lines get a little bit wonky, and it's okay. It's okay. Okay, all the lines are stitched. It's quilted, and I've taken my iron, very gently gone over the stitches where the friction pin was, and the heat removes it. So that's pretty nifty. Now I need to go put some fusible interfacing on my other piece and cut things down to the size that I want them. So this is my front piece, and I made it about a little over an inch taller on either side of my paper insert, and about 1.25 inches longer on either side of the insert. So that gives plenty of room for after I sew my both sides together, and they'll have their seam allowances and stuff. So that gives a little extra room to go around the perimeter of the journal. Next, I'm going to cut my interior fabric the same exact size as my exterior fabric. Once you cut your interior piece, you're going to want to decide what kind of interfacing you want. There's fusible fleece, which is kind of a little bit thicker, and then you have SF101, which is thinner. It just gives the fabric just a little bit of stiffness, and just gives it a little bit more heft. But so it just depends how thick you want yours to be and how fluffy, I guess you could say. So I'm going to go with the fusible fleece because I think I'm all about the fluffy right now. So I cut my fusible fleece about 1/4 inch shorter on each side so that there's a little bit of room on the edges. When I say 1/4 inch on each side, I mean 1/4 inch on the length and the width. And that gives just a little bit of, sorry about the dog barking, that gives just a little bit of room for when you iron, that you won't accidentally get glue on your iron. And you want to put the fusible fleece with the rough side towards the inside of your fabric. Okay, so at this point, I have my fusible fleece fused onto the interior fabric. This looks like this because it has the batting. And what I need to do next is determine what I'm going to use for my closure and if I'm going to put a pocket or not on the interior. Okay, so we're going to make the pocket, and this is folded over. You can see here, and I just kind of, you know, judge about how deep I want my pocket to be. I may have gone a little bit shallow on this one, but that's okay. It will still hold things. And you're going to stitch a top stitch along this folded edge at the top, about 1/8 of an inch down from the edge, to just give it a nice finished look. Then we're going to place it along this interior panel. We're going to clip it so that when you stitch the two panels together, it will get automatically drawn in or stitched in, and it will form a pocket that way. We're also going to stitch at the midpoint and give it like a little extra, I don't know, like tacking, like that will help bring the pockets taut. So we'll do that after I stitch the top stitch, and then I will measure the midpoint and stitch a line there. Okay, so I sewed that line here by finding the midpoint, and I did a really bad job of staying straight. So at any rate, don't do what I do. Do as I say, not as I do. Make sure you marked, maybe drawn a line from the midpoints. I was kind of guessing a little bit there. Don't do that. Measure. Anyways, it will be fine because some of this will get pulled under. And then this line, this row of stitching, or column rather, will be hidden by the papers. But now you have your pocket starting to be formed here. And you also, on the front, will clip your closure, whatever kind of ribbon or tie you want to use. I'm pretty limited on what I have right now for ribbon and ties and things, but I did cut an excess of ribbon because I want this to be able to wrap around a couple times. And so I have made this one long and this one shorter, and I will adjust it after the sewing is done. But it is clipped at the midpoint, the halfway mark between on these ends, the halfway mark, and I will get stitched. It will get stitched. Actually, I'm going to do a basting stitch. I'm going to stitch these so that they are in place, with just a couple stitches on each side so that they're in place and I don't have to worry about making sure they get caught when I stitch the two sides together. So I went ahead and did a little basting stitch to keep this in place for when I sew the two panels together, which is coming up next. But to keep this out of the way, I'm going to just do a little something like this. It's very professional here. And then I'm going to pin it so it's not in the way, which means I have to get out my pins. Okay, so I'm going to just take this little bundle here, this little bundle of ribbon, and I'm going to pin it so that it's not in the way. There. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Just gathering it together, and then I'm going to pin it, and I'm going to be very careful when I'm turning my fabric. You'll see what I mean, as to not poke myself later, but this keeps it out of the way. So what I'm going to do next is sew these panels together, right sides together. So they go like this, pretty sides facing each other, and I can trim that, and then I'm going to clip them all the way around so that I make sure that it all stays together. I'm going to clip it all the way around, and then I'm going to leave an empty few inches at the bottom because this is where we're going to turn it inside out. So I will not stitch in a few inches at the bottom here, but everything else I'm going to stitch all the way around in a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I like to draw a little line there. I know it's hard to see, but to make sure and remind myself not to stitch there. But everywhere else I'm going to stitch all the way around. Again, right sides are together. You've got a bit of a sandwich here, so you want to make sure you're catching all of your fabrics and that your seam allowance is in far enough to get all of your layers. All the layers. So I've stitched all the way around the perimeter, except for here, where I've left a gap. or I can use this to pull it inside out. But first, I want to trim the corners a little bit here. Just give them a little trim, like this. And I'm going to reach in and I'm going to unpin those areas that I have pinned in here so that I'm not reaching in blind and getting myself, sticking myself, because I don't want to stick myself with those pins. So luckily this gap is big enough for me to see in here, find the pin, and do it. And then I'm going to reach in, pull it all out through this opening. It sometimes doesn't look very pretty in the process. Sometimes it's more difficult than others. But here we go. And you want to poke the corners out real good, usually using a tool. But at first, with your fingers, I'm going to poke those out. I have a tool that I'll be using to poke the corners out even more, but this is a start. This is what it looks like right now. You can see the pockets attached, and you can see you have to kind of roll these edges and then iron them to get them to lay flat, and then it's all smoothed out. But what I'm going to do after I get it smoothed out and ironed out, I'm going to be folding these in and clipping it so that when I do my top stitch at 1/8 of an inch, it's going to catch that and seal that closed. So I'll be clipping it all the way down, making sure it's folded just right so that it looks in line with the rest of the cover. Sometimes I have to clip and unclip a couple times to make sure it's how I want it. But you can see when I do that top stitch, it's going to close this hole, which will be very nice and will look very nice if I do a good job. This is one of the hardest parts for me, getting this just right. I find it challenging because I don't want to mess it up. But until it's stitched, you can refold it and rearrange it as many times as you need to until it looks like it's all even. So I am going to go around and roll these out and iron them, and then make sure that's how I want it before I go around and top stitch around the whole cover. And it's going to look pretty nice. I think it's going to look good. So I'm going to go iron and then top stitch around using a 3.5 stitch length for that top stitch and 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, you can see I did a top stitch all the way around. You can see it on the inside, all the way around, and that closed up that gap at the bottom. And so now my cover is ready for me to either stitch my insert in, which is how I normally do it, or create like a TN style, make it like a TN style cover. I could do either way. And it's kind of nice that it's flexible like that. Trim my ribbon tails, but I won't make them too short because it'll give me more flexibility to leave them, you know, kind of long. So voila. Now we have a cover. And it's pretty cute. I like it. These pockets are going to work good.